The Examined Life. This book is about learning to live. In simple stories of encounter between a psychoanalyst and his patients, The Examined Life reveals how the art of insight can illuminate the most complicated, confounding, and human of experiences. Let's get our candles going, and then we'll get started. 1, 2, and the one you can't see. Come on, light up. 3. I loved this book. This book was really good, and I recommend it to everyone. I'll first say that. So, Stephen Grosz is a psychotherapist. Actually, I'll probably go into a little bit of background. So, he's a psychotherapist, and I'm sure not everyone is actually that familiar with what psychotherapy actually entails. I have quite a inside view, I guess, because my love is in psychotherapy, in analysis. So psychotherapists can do different types of therapy. So I'll just talk about from my love experience because that'll be the easiest for me to explain. When my love first started seeing his therapist, he would see her once a week, and she always recommended that they increase their sessions to more than that. And so he's gotten to the point now where he sees her 4 times a week, and that sort of therapy is called analysis. Now, this is all very secondhand. I've never been in a single session. I've never, heard a session, anything like that. So this is just the impressions of a wife who talks to him afterwards. So for anybody in therapy, I'm sorry if I don't describe it well. Just doing the best that I can here. But I believe that the idea behind psychotherapy is to you come as you are. And there's actually a really great story that talks about this, but I'll get into that in a little bit. You come as you are, and you just share any thought that you have, anything that you're thinking about, and the therapist will basically be there to reflect back to you and to help you just really delve into your thought moment to moment to understand where it's coming from. But this isn't therapy that you have for a month or two and you get some insight and then you move on. It's something that is very, very deep. It goes very deeply, even though it can feel like surface level. And it's able to, so your therapist can, almost, if you remember last time when we talked about not in your genes and the impact that childhood maltreatment can have on children as they grow up and turn into adults. The point of the therapist is almost to be another parental figure for you and to give you a parental figure who doesn't give you that maltreatment, in essence. But it's not just about necessarily maltreatment, but about where your needs weren't particularly met, which isn't always intentional maltreatment. Sometimes it's not really overt maltreatment, it's more the subtle things where, our needs weren't quite met. in this book, he talks about the experiences of a number of his clients. And then one that's himself and his dad, and then another that it was his friend. And it's actually his friend is the one I was just talking about before the story. His friend went to see a psychotherapist. And it had been 5 years and they hadn't spoken about it. And obviously Stephen didn't want to bring it up because being a psychotherapist, he knew how important that safe space is. He didn't want to intrude upon it. So he waited for his friend to bring it up. And so it'd been 5 years on and his friend brought it up. And he said, maybe we'll see if we can find it. Towards the back of the book. Ah, yes, I'm being a patient. Here we go. Be in there, 167. Oh, here it is. Tom turned towards me. You didn't exactly lie to me, he said, but you didn't tell me what to expect. And so then Tom, his friend, goes on to describe the thoughts that he would have going into therapy. He would think about, oh, well, should I take the stairs? Because he doesn't like being in an elevator with somebody else. But then if he goes up, 4 or 5 flights of stairs, then he'll be all sweaty. And then he would go into the office, he would get called into the office, and he would wonder, should he stay looking at the therapist or should he lay down? And if he lays down, should he take his shoes off or should he not? If he takes his shoes off, would that be considered rude? If he doesn't take his shoes off and then he puts them up on the lounge, would he make the lounge dirty? And then that might be considered rude. And he had all these thoughts going on just on the way into therapy. And they spent a long time talking about them. And this is what I mean about, it can seem mundane. These seem just like very minor thoughts. But the therapist, in being able to continually dig in and figure out what's actually going on in his thinking at every step, was able to assess and help him to understand that he was looking for criticism. He was expecting that he was going to be criticized for being sweaty or not being sweaty, for having his shoes on, not having his shoes on, for the way he sat, the way he looked, and that sort of thing. And so they came to the conclusion together that he was using, because he was expecting to get this critical treatment, that he was being critical of others to almost preempt them. So it was really interesting, but I loved that line with that you didn't really lie to me, but you didn't really tell me what to expect. But I think what it was really illustrative of was that every kind of thought that we have reveals our psychology, that the whole basis and understanding for how we view the world and everything that goes into how we interact with and determine to live in the world is reflected in how we think from moment to moment. So I thought that was very, very interesting that we're going through these really simple things and we're able to make this rather unique insight. One of the other stories that I wanted to share with, there are so many in here, I really can't highly recommend this book enough. It is definitely a 5-star book in my opinion. It is very compelling, very good reading. But one of the other stories, there was a gentleman who came in to see Stephen Grosz, who was somebody who would very brazenly lie. And he wasn't somebody who really tried to make his lies seem believable. And he wasn't somebody who really tried to cover up his lies. He would just really brazenly lie. And so this was, something that became apparent to the therapist, into the therapy. But why took a lot longer. I think he said it was a couple years into the therapy. When he first mentioned that he used to wet the bed as a child. So this man was the oldest child, and he had 2 younger twin brothers. And the 3 of them all lived in the same room. And so when the twins came along, his mother was very busy caring for these 2 twin children. And they didn't get a lot of one-on-one time, just he and his mother. So he did wet the bed, and when he had this, he knew that basically if his dad knew that if he wet the bed, that his dad would be very angry with this and would take it out on him. And that never happened. So his dad didn't know that he wet the bed. And so he would wet the bed, he would have soiled sheets in the morning. And then every night when he would come back, he would have clean sheets and a nicely made bed. And his bedwetting stopped as his mom died when he was about 12 or 13 years old. And his bedwetting just stopped right then. And it's actually, so they think that probably that's when he started this brazen lying. And it was this connection because basically when you experience somebody brazenly lying, quite often, we don't tend to call people out and say, hey, you're lying. That's not true. We'll kind of silently go along with it, even though we know it's not true. Very, common to have that sort of reaction. And it was basically that reaction that he was trying to elicit, because in a way that was the response that his mother had had, was to ignore the problem that he had and make it okay. So when he had wet the bed, his mom would ignore the problem. They wouldn't talk about it, but she would clean it up and make it all okay. And basically by making these brazen lies, he would get that from other people because they wouldn't call him out on it. They would kind of ignore it and go along with it. So I thought that was a really fascinating insight. And it was something where I could really see how that would work together, how you would have that interpretation. Now there was one more story I wanted to go through, and then I wanted to share with you, I guess, the thoughts that I had about myself after going through this book. The final story is about a child who was probably 8-9 years old. Very troubled. He'd been pulled out of school and put into these sort of remedial classes. And as part of that, he was going to, see a therapist. So he was seeing his therapist, and the therapist had been seeing him for about a year. And he would spit on his therapist every single day. And so the therapist would get angry when he would spit on him, and then not really know what to do with that. just that he was just feeling angry. And he didn't know why his patient kind of needed him to feel angry. And he felt like, oh, you could not spit on me, so I don't know why you're spitting on me. So it was really interesting. So he went to see another psychotherapist. It's actually quite common for psychotherapists to be in analysis themselves to make sure that they're not going to have transference of their own emotions and experiences onto their patients, and so that they can deal with everything that must come up in these sessions. It's quite a challenging job, but seems quite interesting. So he went to see this woman who had been a therapist, I think, for 50 years or so, and she'd been working with children for all that time. And one of the questions she asked was that question, why does he need you to be angry? Because I'm sure you're not always angry when a patient spits on you. And he thought of an example of another patient, another child who was more autistic, and when he spit on him, he wanted to, let him know it was okay to make a mistake, and he served to reassure him and make him feel better. And the conclusion they came to was that he wanted him to be angry, and he didn't really know why. And so I'm going to read you a part of that. Okay, let's see. This one was on how anger can keep us from sadness. That was page... Let's see here. So this is right after he had gone to see the other psychotherapist, and came into the session. The child spat on him. Well, do you have anything to say about that? Before I could answer, he spat in my face. We went inside. When you spit on me, I said, you want me to get angry with you. Because if I'm angry with you, it means I believe you could be different than you are. If I'm angry, it means I still believe we can fix what's broken. He was silent for a moment, and I then asked him, can you tell me what's broken? My brain's broken, stupid. He walked over to the small chair I was sitting on. My brain doesn't work, not like other people's. Sitting down next to me at the low table, he described looking out of the bus window on his way to the unit that morning. Everywhere there were children in school uniforms with book bags, gym kits, and footballs. He recognized many of the boys and girls from his old school. They were growing up doing new things. I don't have a book bag. I'm crap at football. I do baby stuff at school. Did I tell you that my sisters practice their multiplication tables on each other? They're younger than me, but they can do all these things I can't do because their brains work. Mine's wrecked. He looked me in the eye. It's really sad. Isn't that really, really sad? Yes, it is really, really sad. There was a great stillness in the room. 2 days later, he spat on me once more, and then never again. So they were basically both engaging in wanting to still think of him as having power over this anger, that he wanted him to be angry with him so that he could feel like he could change, so they didn't have to acknowledge and talk about the thing that they couldn't change, which was his feeling that his brain was broken. Very heartbreaking and very, very sad, but I think there's a lot of healing that can come in bringing those things out into the open and bringing that awareness. And so reading this book, The Examined Life, shortly after I read Not in Your Genes, really had me thinking a lot about my own life the experiences that I've had that shape how I am. And I would say one of my biggest things in my psychology is I really, really hate to be interrupted or spoken over. And it really, it makes me feel ignored and not paid attention to, which probably relates back to when I was about 4 or 5 years old. That's when my parents split up, and my dad was working really long hours, and my mom was suffering a bit of depression, and so I was a bit on my own. She was still in the home with me, but I spent a lot of time having to entertain myself and figure out, what I was doing. And so, I think it relates back to that. I don't know. I haven't been in psychotherapy, so these are all just my really rudimentary thoughts about that. And so but I do think that there is a connection between my really strong reaction to being talked over and being interrupted, and this feeling of being ignored, and even to the point of, I've created YouTube channels, and this is my desire for my life, is to create places like this and it's interesting because it's a place where nobody can talk over me. I'm talking to you and you may click off and not watch till the end, but you can't talk over me in essence. So it's interesting to me, I guess, that's part of what I've chosen in a way that I'd like to set up my life is in that way. But it's also interesting because it's also revealed in the way I relate to other people. One of my favorite ways to interact with people is one-on-one, and I always am trying to help people feel like they are listened to. I always want people to feel like they can talk to me and like I will listen to them. And, that's something I spend a lot of time listening to my love and what he's struggling with. And I may not often, it's very difficult with his mental illness, but I may not be able to give the emotional support he's looking for, but I always am willing to listen to him and, hear what's going on with him. Not always, I'm not a saint. I do have impatient and, anyway, I just meant, that's probably more than most other people would. I am willing to listen. Not 100%. But anyway, it was really interesting for me. That was a little insight I got. It also gave me an insight to a problem that I've been having with someone in my family. I won't really say who. I haven't gone into it, and I don't want to. More for their sake than for mine. I'd be happy to, but I just, if it's somebody else's problem as well, I don't necessarily feel like it's the right thing to just broadcast that on the internet. But a very significant issue in our relationship that's still ongoing and still has ramifications and impacts to this day. But in reading this book, even though none of the examples were exactly related, there were certain things that just helped me. Oh, well, that's what's actually going on with somebody when they did kind of this horrible thing or this, sort of thing, that it wasn't really for that reason, it was for another reason. And so it's the first time that I've been actually able to understand why this person might have done that thing, because that was something I could never understand. And now I can. And so there's a little bit of peace for me in that I'm not just perpetually now wondering how could you or why even would you do this thing. I can understand a little bit more potentially why it doesn't really fix the issue, but it does help me come from a place of understanding and at least feel better in myself in regards to the issue, that it's not just this itch that I perpetually need to scratch. So, The Examined Life, definitely recommend. Read it. It's not that long. So it's about just a little over 200 pages. And it's just so good. I can't recommend it highly enough. So if you have read it, let us know down in the comments what your thoughts are, what insights you've had. And let me just preview what we will be looking at next time, which is this: Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less by Greg McKeown. I look forward to seeing